Welcome to Redirect Immigration Law and Perspectives, a weekly dive into the world of immigration law and its human consequences. I'm your host, Stephen Robbins, joined shortly by fellow immigration attorney Curtis Morrison. He's involved in a lawsuit sort of against, well, I guess it's the Biden administration now. But essentially what happened, and we'll get into this in a minute, but back in April, Trump announced one of many immigration or travel bans. And a lot of people have been affected by that. And it hasn't really been a story. I don't know why this happened, but what happened essentially was that Trump tweeted that he was ending all immigration by executive order. And then the actual proclamation was published, and it was a little less than all immigration, but it was still a lot. And I just remember people being sort of like, you guys are overreacting. It's not all immigration, okay? There's certain exceptions and the story just got buried and it was a non-story. But it's been a big deal, and the Biden administration hasn't rolled it back, and they haven't indicated that they want to stop fighting it in court. So it's a source of great frustration. If it's frustrating for me, and I have a normal life, I get to go home and have my family, try to imagine how frustrating it must be when you're trying to get your mother or your father or your spouse or a child to come join you in this country. You know, frustrating is not the word that you would use if that were the case. Something more than frustrated. But the Biden administration, I mean, look, it hasn't been good enough. I think I'm an optimist. I want to give them space to improve these things and so on and so forth. But the bottom line is, there were thousands of changes to the immigration system, 100% of them negative, all of them designed to punish or complicate the process for immigrants. I mean, there is a database of all these changes. There's a professor from Stanford who's tracked every single change that was made, from little things like now you don't have to push 2 for English or whatever when you call the USCIS hotline, to big things, right? You know, maybe some of the big things are politically complicated. I don't think they are necessarily, but if that's your perspective, okay. There's no reason why you wouldn't be aggressively rolling back the long list of small things, because if you don't, very soon your administration will be over and we'll be left just with Trump's immigration system. And that's no good. So just to get back to the status quo of the Obama administration is going to take a lot of work. And so far, we haven't seen it. So we've got to turn the temperature up. We've got to put a little bit of pressure on the administration, your elected officials, to say, hey, look, this is a crisis, right? This system is beyond broken, and it's time for serious reforms. Enjoy the conversation with Curtis. If you like the show, there's so many things you can do, you guys. You can subscribe on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify. You can become a patron at patreon.com/redirect. Patreon is basically a website where you can set up safe, recurring payments to creators that you love, like us, obviously, or others. And it's a great way to support the show, to keep us going. So we appreciate all your support and enjoy the show. Have you seen the Britney Spears New York Times documentary on Hulu?
No, I probably should, but I'm very biased in favor of Britney.
Is that true?
Yes, I saw where Lady Gaga came out with some Oreo cookies today. I wasn't happy about it. I'm very loyal to Britney.
Okay, so how old are you?
I'm old. I'm over 50.
Okay, but you're still on the Britney train. I had an experience the other day with my assistant where I was talking about Britney Spears. And I realized it's like if when I was in high school, my boss was talking to me about Karen Carpenter because she's so young.
Right.
She has no idea what I'm talking about. That's just some old person thing. But anyways, so we're happy to be joined today by Curtis Morrison, right?
That is my name.
He's the silver fox of the immigration law community. Is that fair to say?
I was thinking the black sheep, but we can go with silver fox. That's fine.
Well, I mean, you got kind of the Van Anderson Cooper thing going on.
Yes, I do. That's true.
So, look, there's not a lot to talk about. these days because, as you know, Joe Biden was elected and he came in and he fixed things. So, I mean, is there anything else that you'd like to talk about today? I mean, what's going on?
Wow. Wasn't that great that everything's fixed now? Yes, there is something I'd like to talk about. That's great lead in there. Okay, so I have the hugest frustration in my life right now because Joe Biden made these promises that he was going to be pro-immigrant and he was going to fix the immigration system, blah, blah, blah. What he did not realize is how ambitious that promise was. And nobody was really paying attention for 4 years except us immigration attorneys and immigration litigators. And Stephen Miller has so thoroughly screwed this system up and sabotaged it. I mean, it's crippled. It will not be able to be fixed in the short term. And there's no way. The consulates are only half staffed, and it takes a year to train a consular officer. So there's a 473,000 documentarily qualified family preference visa applicant queue. And it's not even a queue. They're not even that organized. And that doesn't include everybody that's refused under 9645 who need to be reconsidered, which adds another 100,000 to it. So,
all right. So let's just back it up for a second. For my mom listens to this show.
Oh, okay. Hi,
Mom. Or my sister probably is a more regular listener. When we talk about applicants at the consulate, a backlog, what are we talking about? What does that mean?
We're talking about a U.S. citizen or lawful permanent resident petition for their family member or a diversity visa winner or another visa category. But what they did is they went through all the hoops to get to that point, which took them 1 to 2 years.
They're doing it the right way, as we're always told, right, is the most important thing. Right.
Exactly. It's legal immigration was suspended by the Trump administration. And it's as if the Democrats and the major news networks never noticed that. And so now there's not exactly the demand that you would expect to fix that.
Right.
25 days into Biden. So,
to be clear, there were thousands of little tiny changes made along the way, but you're talking about a specific thing that happened, I think in April, right, of last year when Trump tweeted that he was ending immigration.
Yeah, April 22nd. Yeah.
And there was a panic, right, at the airports and everyone was freaking out in Europe. Is that the same time? Or am I getting my recent current events mixed up?
Well, the first panic at the airport was the Muslim ban in 2017. And
we got to get our airport panics correct.
Exactly.
Right.
Because there was another one in April of last year, and then there was one in June, and then there was one on New Year's Eve. And actually, there was one a few days ago under the Biden administration because Trump, I don't know why he did it, but he actually canceled the Chingam ban. And then Biden reinstated it and extended it, but he only did it within 24 hours of when it expired. So I had clients that had already bought tickets planning to come to the U.S. that were not able to because of Biden.
Right.
So many bans.
So Trump tweets out that he's ending all immigration, and this is last April. There's some sort of panic. And then it gets clarified that it's only these groups. And I remember one immigration reporter sort of tweeting out, everyone's over-exaggerating. It's not all immigrants. It's just certain categories. So who exactly was subject to this April ban that you're talking about?
Right. And it's unclear what to call it because you can't call it a travel ban when it was the 8th travel ban to come along. I usually call it the April ban or 10014 because that's the proclamation number. The people that got hit the hardest were the families of green card holders, meaning a spouse of a lawful permanent resident. They might have gone all the way with the procedure and their process, but they were not able to finish it. It was suspended. And that's the same with children of lawful permanent residents, whether they're 12 years old or younger. And of course, it would also include parents and siblings of U.S. citizens. You take all those categories together, the only one that's left in the family preference category is spouses of U.S. citizens, which makes up probably 10% of the total family preference immigrants. Don't know that number exact. But what he did was the most comprehensive immigration ban in history, and it didn't even get reported. And so it's been frustrating that thing is in effect, and most of the American people don't know it.
I think that a lot of people, I saw, for example, in New Zealand, they were very successful in combating COVID in part by taking some draconian and very extreme, it's an island, so it's a lot easier for them to do this. immigration measures and cutting off certain types of visas and things like that. And I think most people would be surprised to find out that COVID was not even technically the reason for the ban. It would be one thing if they said, look, until we have a testing regimen in place and people can be, properly tested before they come, then we've got to shut this thing down. Even I, as an immigration advocate, somebody who's also concerned about the spread of a deadly pandemic, would say, yeah, we got to maybe shut things down for a few months, get the testing in place, and then resume in a way that's safe and that makes sense. Talk about what the actual reasoning for the ban was.
And so when you say the actual reason, I'm going to have to break that down into two parts here. The purported reason that they listed in the proclamation was to protect American jobs because, these family-based immigrants, these 12-year-old kids, are coming over and stealing our jobs, apparently. Mm-hmm. And it reminded me of, I think there was a South Park episode where they're like, they steal our jobs. That was the Steal Our Jobs proclamation, and that's the focus of it. That's what it reportedly was. And then that's a myth because immigrants are net job creators because they're our entrepreneurs. But the real motivation, Stephen Miller planned this in 2020. He wanted to connect it to mumps or the regular flu. And when the White House domestic policy director confronted him, this was reported, and said, no, this isn't going to work. We're not going to be able to sell a travel ban on immigrants because of mumps. That's not going to work. And then he just, COVID for him was the lottery because he got to use it to implement this plan that he already had in his head. He had already talked to the attorneys about it. History will show that. And that's why they were able to roll it out so quickly and comprehensively.
One of the things about it that gave me whiplash was for 4 years, the administration had been ramping up this public charge stuff. We've got to show that our clients are not just like humans with human rights. No, they're hardworking, they're industrious, they're self-supporting, they've got jobs lined up, they've got this and that. And then suddenly we're told, actually, you're too hardworking and we can't compete with you. And because you're so industrious and so hardworking and so self-sufficient, you're actually stealing the jobs. And it's this dichotomy on the sort of right-wing ideology or mythology about immigrants that they're both hardworking job stealers and these sort of parasites on society that want to just sit around and be lazy and take public benefits. And so on a dime overnight, we had this thing where we had to go from proving that our clients were hardworking to...
They're not going to be hardworking, right?
Right. Exactly. But one of the most pernicious things about this is that there's really no waiver. There's no get around. In my experience, I've got a guy, everything's approved, just like you said. The waivers he needed have been approved. Everything's set up. He literally just needs an officer to go like this and stamp his passport. And his daughter, who's very close to, is giving birth soon. And we submitted evidence to this to the consulate saying, is there any way that we can get around this ban? I mean, he wants to be there for the birth of his grandchild and they, boilerplate, no. So have we ever seen anything like this where there's just, there's no exceptions, there's no hardship waivers, there's no get around?
Right. And the irony of that is, if you read the rhetoric that the State Department put out on their website, there was this rigorous national interest waiver available. And they actually said, oh, this is the way you qualify for it, as if it existed. And then you go look at the visa statistics and they didn't actually issue it. And like your office, we submitted multiple ones of those. We were successful in getting, I think, 3 out of maybe 100 approved. One was a Russian teenager that was about to be conscripted into the military. One was a plaintiff in the Middle East whose spouse, his wife, was hospitalized with pregnancy complications. I mean, her life was in danger. And also the life of their baby after it was born. It was born like 3 months premature. So that one, I always tell people now that somebody really has to be dying.
Right.
And even then, it's a toss-up whether or not they're going to give a national interest waiver.
Right. I'm just a solo practitioner. I have a number of clients have their consular interviews in Ciudad Juarez just before everything shut down. I feel really lucky about that.
Yeah.
I do have two clients stuck down there in Mexico. One who I just mentioned, the other one, her husband went down to visit her and passed away of COVID during that visit. And she's down there taking care of her daughter with a severe disability, just wanting to get back with her family.
Wow.
And I'm just one solo practitioner, right? Just one guy. And you said there was 400,000 cases right now held up?
473, according to a declaration filed last week. 473,000, and that's just the family preference category. So it doesn't count other employment and DVs.
Right. When did you get involved in bringing this lawsuit?
In the immigration business, I've not really been around that long. I was working on the federal climate case until 2018. And then I moved back to California, started working for an immigration firm. And the firm I worked for was advocating for the Yemeni and who were impacted by the Muslim ban, 9645. So I spent about a year and a half, 2 years preparing to really do something about the Muslim ban because I didn't think anything was being done. And I thought the waiver program was window dressing. It wasn't real. What was interesting is I put myself in a position in May of 2020 to file a lawsuit for people that were impacted in the diversity visa lottery by the Muslim ban waiver not being real. And then when he passed the April proclamation, it turned out that everybody's affected. The Muslim ban applies to everybody. Like, that's really the effect.
Right.
A ban that was just on a few countries, all of a sudden was a ban on everyone. And then people were like, oh, wait a second, these bans, they're not good to people that are impacted, but
right.
The American people didn't know. So I fell into, by accident, this joinder multi-participant litigation where I have 5,000 clients. That happened actually by accident and since May of last year.
Mm-hmm. So you were probably moving forward knowing that the Trump administration was obviously going to fight this tooth and nail. For them, it was something well thought out, well considered, something they wanted. What was your sense after November, let's say 6th, when it seemed pretty clear that Biden had won? Take us back to your mindset at that time.
My colleagues, I would say, were much more optimistic than me because all my colleagues are younger than me, I think. They have more hope. And what they thought was that the U.S. attorneys in all of our cases are just going to immediately change their tone. I said, That's not going to happen. First of all, it definitely wouldn't happen before the election, but it's not even going to happen after the election because the assistant U.S. attorneys that we're fighting in court are so far removed from not only the attorney general, but also the lower level people at the State Department that are communicating to them. And so my expectations were not that high, and they've been met. That's basically what's happened. We were a few days into the Biden administration, and I watched a hearing in Enunciado where the government's attorney was vehemently arguing that family separation is not irreparable harm. And all I could think of is, why did I vote for this guy? You know, it was very frustrating.
Mm-hmm. And specifically in terms of the April immigration ban, I mean, what has the Biden administration done in your lawsuit, or have they indicated any intent to roll that back? Or,
right.
I mean, what's going on now?
Right. So basically, they had three big losses under the Trump administration with respect to this ban. They had the Gomez and Consolidated cases. Three of those were mine, Mohammed Fong John Kennedy, and then there was another one, Aker. They had that big loss in September. They had a big loss October 1st by the NAM case for employment visas. And then they had a loss in our case, Young, in December. Both of those last two were in San Francisco. And so the Biden administration has not had a loss on 10014 yet, the April proclamation, but there's two hearings on February the 18th coming up, and they will have a loss on it. So it's up to them now whether or not they want to be told by the courts not to do unlawful proclamations, or if they want to rescind them themselves and take credit for it. And what we're being told by the attorneys every day on these cases is that the administration is reviewing it, but they're going this extra mile to say they're reviewing that Trump-era proclamation to distance themselves from it while they're defending it.
Mm-hmm. Right. And it seems weird because, again, it has nothing to do with the spread of COVID. I mean, it's clearly white supremacy, right? It's barely even dressed up in actual policy concerns. And the other thing that's strange about their refusal to just step away from it and say, like, we're not defending this, we're going to retract the proclamations, is that because of the backlog and because most consulates are they're not operating at all or they're almost entirely closed, even if you withdrew the proclamations, immigration is still going to be a slow trickle, right? I mean, that's a whole other problem on the back end of rescinding the proclamations. Isn't that right?
Yeah, that's very smart of you to recognize that, because most of our colleagues, it hasn't really sunk in yet. I started telling people that this backlog is going to take months to a year, and the numbers tell a different story. It's going to take several years.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Because they normally don't do 1 million applications a year. And here they have 500,000 that are sitting there, and they're half staffed. And COVID's still there. So no matter what he does, these new paths he does, the existing paths are broken.
Right. So we'll continue to follow that story. At least one of my clients is, I think, signed on to your lawsuit, and it's a client who I care very deeply about. So it's an issue that I'm following very closely. But I want to ask you, sort of, if we take a step back, what other observations do you have so far about the Biden administration? Either things that they've done that you're happy about or things that you feel like they've fallen short on?
Well, I am happy that they did cancel the Muslim ban 9645. But I've got a funny little quirk about that story. I have like 8 outstanding lawsuits, maybe 7, 6 or 7 or 8, challenging the waiver program of 9645. And the U.S. attorneys in those cases are going crazy trying to get those cases dismissed as moot without going crazy trying to get the remaining plaintiffs issued visas. So that tells me something about the focus of the administration. Let's get the immigration attorneys off of our back and not actually let's solve the problem, because they could fix the wrongs and just adjudicate these. My clients were not trying to skip to the front of the line. They were at the front of the line. These people made visa applications at embassies in 2016, 2017.
Right.
So it's insane that I'm having to fight mootness motions right now in these cases with the Biden administration.
Right.
So.
One thing I've noticed is that there were some day one things. There was a deportation pause, not technically a moratorium, I guess, which was immediately stayed in court, and they haven't really pushed back on that. One thing that we saw with Trump was he didn't take no for an answer when he was struck down on the Muslim ban. It went from a Muslim ban to a travel ban to
3 times.
He kept fixing it until he got it right eventually. I mean, right in quotations. We're not seeing that same kind of vigor from the Biden administration when it comes to defending things like a deportation pause. It makes you think like maybe they don't care that much about it.
Right.
And then even the enforcement memo, the priorities, that's good. That's, a huge step. I do a lot of removal defense and that sort of thing, and that's a big deal. But we haven't seen it actually trickle down, at least as far as I've seen, into actual memos and guidelines. So ICE doesn't have any actual policies. There's nothing that's been released that people can like sink their teeth into and say like, oh, this is the new policy moving forward. And then the other executive orders that he signed were like, let's form a think tank.
Oh, yeah. Let's study this monstrous behavior to see if it's wrong. I did find there was one positive thing I've left out, and I think it was a result of our Young case. In a status conference, the government realized that one of their policies was unattainable, and the judge was being critical of it, I think, asking some questions, and it really was indefensible. And that is, Iranians are required to come back to a second interview no matter what, because their oaths expire after a year and waivers always take more than a year. Well, that's an impossible situation because they can't go to Abu Dhabi because Abu Dhabi won't give a visa. The U.S. Embassy in Ankara says that you have to be a Turkish resident to enter, and Eurovan's covered up. They're too busy. They can't even take any more cases. So basically, immigration from Iran had ended, and that was evident coming out on this call. And Kimberly Robinson, the assistant U.S. attorney, while she was on the call, that's what's interesting about these Zoom hearings versus regular old hearings where we're in court. She's talking to her client while she's talking to the judge. So sometimes she says, my client has just updated me on our position. So anyway, later that day, as a result of what was said in that conference, this has just been a couple weeks ago, that requirement was temporarily waived. So if you had an interview and it's been a year ago, the State Department is not requiring you to come back to an interview just for an oath. Your medical's still expired, so you still have to go back to somewhere and get a medical exam and get it to the embassy and do some travel and rigmarole. But you don't have to physically go in that embassy and get the oath. And that barrier actually allows some people to move forward that wouldn't. So I wouldn't say that they're completely like non-responsive, but they're going to need to be ambitious to even get caught up to Obama era status quo.
Right. That's right. I did see that they are starting to let some MPP asylum applicants in to the country, which is a big step.
Yeah.
I tweeted this the other day, but some of the big stuff, I understand politics can be difficult. They're taking into consideration all these other things. And I get that. And I want to be sort of realistic, I guess, about some of those things. But there's so many bad Trump era policies, little tiny things, like I say tiny, but the Iranians who can immigrate now, it's not tiny to them.
Yeah. Yeah.
But there's literally hundreds of those things. And they could that are easy to roll back. They could have 5 things a day or 10 things a week and just say, like, on Friday, here's our immigration dump. We're rescinding these cases and we're doing this. And to have reached almost a month into the administration and to have had mostly, we're going to study why people immigrate here. It's like, we know, we don't need to do that. I don't know. It's been very frustrating.
Right. I would agree.
What do you think the best ways are for people to advocate? Because I'm always afraid that, like, we have to be critical and we have to push the administration in the right direction. I also don't want to fuel the fire of people who say, like, there's no difference between Biden and Trump. And see, we told you they're just the same. Well, they're not quite the same yet. So what's the best way for people to advocate for positive change, do you think?
Okay, I want to say something for the first time. And so I may get kicked off the podcast. I think that immigration attorneys and the interest of our principal business is not being advocated for at the White House or in Congress right now. And I don't really know why AILA has dropped the ball on that. But they seem to be very worried about the interest of Silicon Valley and the employment visas. And they will go to bat for them left and right all over the country. They'll file amicus briefs. And when the June 22nd proclamation came out last year that extended the April proclamation, their reaction was very telling. Because when it extended the proclamation that affected immigrants, the ones that we're facing that caused this backlog, AILA's reaction didn't mention that. It only mentioned, oh my gosh, they're extending it to the employment-based categories? No, forbid. And that's when they got started with litigation. There's a reason why I filed Muhammad before they filed their amended complaint in Gomez, because we were looking out for the DVs before they even knew they existed. And so I think that if it's not AILA, the U.S. needs a pro-immigrant lobbying entity that takes these issues seriously and takes them to Congress. Because I'll tell you what, the right has it. FAIR right now is going crazy trying to hold on to their remaining members of Congress that they have influence over to fight any reforms, and they're being successful.
Right. That's a really good point. I know I've shared this story on the podcast before, but in 2013, when it looked like immigration reform is going to happen, and there was a bill that passed the Senate, AILA is the American Immigration Lawyers Association. Most immigration lawyers are members, I would say, maybe most.
Yeah.
I've been a member my whole career. So I went to DC with a group of other lawyers from Washington State, and we had it all mapped out, who we're going to go talk to. And it was really peculiar. I represent mostly farm workers, construction workers and things like that. And I'm sitting next to some guy from Seattle, no disrespect, but all his clients are Microsoft and big hospitals that need, more nurses or whatever.
Right.
Our practices couldn't be more different. I have no idea what he's talking about when he dips into the employment lingo. It's all totally over my head. And when I talk about cancellation of removal caps and U visas, he's totally confused too. And it's always struck me as really odd that, like, we're here trying to do something together. You're like, why are these things married?
We're immigration attorneys. They're non-immigration attorneys.
Immigration attorneys.
You know what I'm saying? Yeah.
Right.
And so it's really odd that we're in the same club and they have more power. And I'll tell you how we know they have more power. At the end of the fiscal year, September 30th, immigrant visas roll over to non-immigrant and they get to use them. And they were celebrating on their little internal company blogs. You know, when you're a partner in big law, you got to write a blog. They were like, oh, there's going to be a surge in visas available for non-immigrants. Yay. And where it came from was all these that were not used because of Proclamation 10014. And I really think that there was some design behind that in lobbying Trump.
Oh, interesting. I hadn't thought about that. So in other words,
are adverse. They're not only disparate, they're adverse.
Right. So in other words, the family visas were blocked in April. And because there were unused visas, they roll over to the employment side. And they're always complaining about a lack of visas. And that might be a legitimate complaint. I don't know anything about that. But they were thrilled that my clients got stuck in Mexico because it means that their engineers from India or whatever get to come over.
Right.
I'm not saying that I have anything against their interests. I don't know anything about it. And I'm sure that they fight and advocate for their clients. But I'd never thought about it quite like that as being adverse to the interests of our clients.
And I share your perspective that I don't blame them for advocating. We need more nurses. I think the fact that we limit the number of doctors and nurses we bring in this country is kind of stupid. So we could fix both of those problems.
Right. So I will vote for you to be the president of the, whatever we're going to call it, the American, the U.S. immigration lobby, whatever. I don't know. We'll come up with an acronym. It's going to be really awesome. And you'll be the president.
I need to wrap up some litigation right now, and then we'll talk about it.
All right. Curtis Morrison, thanks so much for coming on and sharing your perspective today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I enjoyed your perspective as well.